This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
I thought that Matt Pryor came in and held his own out there. I mean, he did a really good job of creating movement. Whenever there were double teams, he came in there and threw guys off the ball. I thought he was really good at protection. So, to me, I don't feel like there was a major drop-off.
That's former Eagles All-Pro tackle Trey Thomas yesterday on the Sports Bash, right here on 97.3 ESPN, telling you there's not a big drop-off in his eyes from Brandon Brooks to Matt Pryor. We got to get to that today here on the warm-up here on 97.3 ESPN+. Plus, it's a Weinberg Wednesday. Dave Weinberg joins us every Wednesday at 1:25. I'm sure he has some perspective on the Eagles. Brandon Brooks, Doug Pederson spoke to the media and more this week. And, of course, your text messages, as always, here on the warm-up, 609-403-0973. As promised, I told you guys yesterday when we found out that Trey Thomas was coming on the Sports Bash, you had to listen in. And if you didn't listen in, you got to go to 97.3ESPN.com and check out some of the things he said. Because let me tell you something. Trey Thomas really drew the line in the sand about a couple things. And one of them being that if the Eagles go with Matt Pryor at right guard this year, that they'll be okay. And this is a guy who was not just playing in the NFL, playing in the NFL at a high level. Like I said, an all-pro, multiple-time Pro Bowler in the NFL. And I find it interesting that he was so adamant yesterday on the Sports Bash about Matt Pryor, because I think at times we have a perception, and I think that perception clearly played itself out in the last 24 hours. We have a perception that the backup for a player, a lot of times, there's a reason why that guy's a backup. Like, there's a specific reason why fill-in-the-blank player is a backup and not a starter. And sometimes we overlook the fact that sometimes the reason why someone is a backup has less to do with them than it is about the starter's high level of talent. And I made the same mistake personally. Look, I'll admit it. I was fully on board with the idea of going out and getting a guy like, the Saints' former guard, Warford, going out and getting somebody to bring in for competition. But after listening to Trey Thomas, I honestly feel a little bit better about Matt Pryor. I feel a little bit better knowing that this guy can play. Now, some people may point to the fact, and I pointed out the stat yesterday, that the Eagles gave up a lot of sacks in the game versus the Seahawks. But we should also point out the reality that they were without both Brooks and Lane Johnson for that Seahawks playoff game, and they had a backup quarterback in there, and they were playing with basically Dante Burnett, Greg Ward, and Josh Perkins as your primary receivers on the outside at times, and Ertz and Goddard on the inside. So how much of those sacks was because Brooks wasn't in the game versus Lane Johnson? How much of it was the fact that you had a backup quarterback in there was having to adjust to the speed of the game? How much of it was the reality that the Eagles were already shorthanded and that losing Brooks and Johnson just made them even weaker and weaker? I think at some point when we look at the Eagles' offensive line, we have to give the organization credit for drafting who they've drafted, cultivating talent on the interior. I don't think it's an accident the Eagles won the Super Bowl with a backup at left tackle in Vaitai. And for as much as people joked about Vaitai turned out to be a viable fill-in guy, and now he goes out and gets a big contract and goes to Detroit. Where did Vaitai go to school? TCU. Where is Matt Pryor out of? TCU. The Eagles obviously have found something with some of these TCU players, and I think maybe we should trust the Eagles that they maybe know something that we don't when it comes to the right guard and especially the offensive line. And one of the things that Trey Thomas pointed to yesterday on the Sports Bash was the fact that Pryor showed that he can play with a silent count. And Trey Thomas on the Sports Bash explained why that experience with the silent count is a big deal.
And also, a lot of people don't realize how difficult going into New York and playing was for him, because now that's his first time having to do silent count. And for us, you have the guard that's looking back at the quarterback to start the cadence while the center is making all the calls. So sometimes by the time you turn your head, everybody's switched around. So, it was a lot of people probably looking over that, but that was a huge deal for him to be able to handle the silent count while he was on the road.
So if Pryor has experience on the offensive line with the silent count, with different elements of the offense, frankly, I feel a lot more comfortable today than I did yesterday with Matt Pryor being the internal option to fill in for Brooks. And if you think about it, it might actually save you money and a roster spot if another issue comes up. If you don't have to invest a bunch of money and resources into the right guard position because you have a adequate guy who can fill in and do the job, I have to ask this question then. Is it possible that the Eagles shouldn't go out and try to add too much more offensive line help because they may need help somewhere else on the roster? Because we always know, what is the story of the Philadelphia Eagles in recent years? Somebody gets injured in the preseason and training camp. Somebody gets injured early in the year. There's never been a year so far that we haven't had a serious injury at some point on the Eagles' calendar from August to December. So is it possible that the Eagles should save their resources instead of going out and signing a veteran to compete with Pryor for right guard, to save that option for another need that we don't even foresee yet? Text board is open, 609-403-0973. The other thing that I thought was very pertinent to what Trey Thomas said yesterday on the Sports Bash was we talked a little bit about here on the warm-up and as well on the Sports Bash yesterday with Mike Gill and Hunter Brody about Jason Peters and about, is there a possibility of playing Jason Peters at right guard or putting him at left guard and moving him to right guard? Because we know that it's been talked about before. Jason Peters himself has told the media, yeah, listen, if they need me to do that, they need me to make that move, I can do it. But Trey Thomas brought up at a great point that, again, this is a guy who's played in the NFL. I didn't even think about this way, and he put it out there purely about there's a reason why it may be a very poor idea to move Peters to the inside at guard.
Yeah, he has the skill to do it. The skill isn't the problem. The problem is the wear and tear on the body, because if you were getting beat up out there playing against defensive ends, you're definitely going to get beat up when you're down there at offensive guard where you're dealing with bigger defensive rushers. And now you're the guy that's going to be starting the movement. So when you look at guard play versus tackles, usually it's the guards that start the movement when it's double teams or if there are any combination blocks. They're the tip of the spear when it comes to setting up those blocks. So, that's a lot of pounding on the body as well.
So two different points he brings up there. He says, listen, if he's getting injured, Jason Peters playing on the outside, he could take more of a beating on the inside, which could lead even to more injuries. So there's a possibility, as Trey inferred, and I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but let me just paint the picture for you. What if you did move Peters into guard and the first week he gets injured and then he's out for the year with a season-ending injury because he's playing guard and he's still having to adapt to playing on the inside because maybe he gets bull rushed by a powerful D tackle? Look at one of the teams in your own division, the Redskins. You got to play the Redskins twice this year. And who do they have? Guys like Jonathan Allen playing on the defensive line. Matt Ioannidis is very underrated as a defensive lineman. They drafted Chase Young. They have all of these guys who are phenomenal talents on that D-line who are coming after the offensive linemen in Washington. And you got to play them twice a year. And if there's a possibility that Jason Peters could take more of a punishment on the inside than the outside, is there maybe then a likelihood that he is injured early on and you still have to play whoever you have to play at the line position? And again, I ask, that's money to bring Peters back that you could have used somewhere else of need. If there's an injury in training camp or the preseason or week one at another position group, and you know that you can have the money and the space in the salary cap to add that depth somewhere else. Now, I'm not saying the Eagles shouldn't add any depth on the offensive line. They obviously need a little bit more depth, whether that is the rookies that they drafted, like Driscoll or Tango from Auburn, or if they go out and sign another inexpensive veteran. I mentioned a guy like Josh Klein yesterday. He was one of the guys listed on Adam Kaplan's list on the website at 97.3 ESPN.com's article. If you think about some maybe less expensive options, guys who have interior line versatility, maybe you do go out and sign up, and maybe you don't spend big money on the guys like Peters and Warford. And then the second part of what Trey Thomas said, and again, that stood out to me, which was he mentioned about the fact, he called it that the guard is the spear at the top tip of those running plays. He's a guy doing movement, doing the pulling, doing different things that, frankly, Jason Peters is not used to doing. And he's doing things that, unless you've played guard X number of times, you may not be familiar with. So this idea that, as was inferred by people yesterday, well, anybody could play guard, or, well, guards are just worse versions of tackles. Trey Thomas is telling you, and other players who have played the position are saying, no. The guard is important. The guard has a specific skill set and responsibilities on that offensive line. And as I brought up to you yesterday, don't overlook the fact that the guards also have to be, for lack of and I'm not trying to create a pun here, but bodyguards for Jason Kelce, because Kelce is not a powerful, super strong center. Kelce is not one of these brute force centers that have played in the NFL over the last 20 years. He is more of a super athlete, very intelligent, high football IQ leader of the line. You don't want Jason Kelce having to snap the ball and look up and he be the primary guard facing off with a guy like Jonathan Allen, for example, of the Redskins. No, you want to have that assignment go to one of the other players who are not having to snap the ball, who their only concentration can be on trying to slow Allen down, because players like Allen that you got to face twice a year, they're not guys that you can just hope for the best with. Even a guy like Leonard Williams in New York, he may have had a very underwhelming season last year, but he's still a phenomenal talent. And if you think about what the Eagles have to deal with this year, the Cowboys have some talent on the defensive line. The Giants have Leonard Williams. The Redskins are stacked on the D-line. You need those guards to be more than just whatever. They can't just be lesser than tackles. No, they have a specific job responsibility, not just on the line responsibilities, but to protect Kelce a little bit as well. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. So after yesterday, the more and more I think about it, the more I feel like, after listening to Trey Thomas on the Sports Bash, after reading the different things I've read about how the Eagles' offense functions, how it runs, how it operates, you have to wonder, maybe the Eagles are best saving that money in case they need to go out and handle their business elsewhere. And part of the reason why I also bring that up is because I was reading an article yesterday, and we're going to have Mike Clay from ESPN tomorrow, on warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. He wrote an article. He basically analyzed all 32 play callers in the NFL. Doug Pederson is on this list of 32, and he's high on the list in one specific area that genuinely surprised me. Of all the 32 play callers in the NFL over the last few years, Doug Pederson has called the most offensive snaps per game in the NFL. The Eagles are number one. For reference sake, also on that list is the Cowboys and the Patriots. But Doug Pederson is topping this list of most offensive snaps per game. Per game. It's a sample size of 64 games for Doug. So if you are one of the highest number of plays called per game on offense in the NFL, isn't that even more of a concern to make sure that you don't just have anybody at right guard, that you don't just say, oh, well, anybody could play guard, or, oh, well, just move Jason Peters over. It's fine. It's not that big a deal. You got to make sure you have the right people on that line. You better make sure that these guys are out there being able to do their job, because Doug is out there calling more offensive snaps per game than a lot of other teams. By the way, the 3 play callers who've had the fewest snaps per game in the last few years, how about the Titans' Arthur Smith? The Titans with Tannehill and Derrick Henry. Well, they're able to grind the ball out at times and do play action because of Derrick Henry. Adam Gase in New York and in Miami. He's also on a list of fewest offensive snaps per game. Kevin Stefanski in Minnesota is among the fewest snaps per game offensively. And those offenses have had luxuries the Eagles have not. If you think about what Stefanski had in Minnesota the last couple of years, arguably 2 of the top 15 wide receivers in the league with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. The Eagles, 2 of the 4 years Doug Pederson has been in Philadelphia, has been among the most drops per target in the NFL. That's a huge difference. So you have the luxury with one guy of having all of these wide receivers who are talented versus a team that can't keep guys healthy and they're dropping like flies, but Doug is still out there calling a ton of plays every single game. If you're concerned about Carson Wentz's health and you're concerned about this offense getting back to the 2017 functionality where it was one of the top 5 offenses in the NFL, if you want to see the best we can from Miles Sanders in year 2 and Deshaun Jackson coming off an injury, quote unquote, in the best shape of his life, you better make sure that your right guard isn't just Joe Schmo. He better be someone who can go out there and do the job and not fail and not learn on the job. Because I'm telling you right now, if you put out some regular Joe Schmo out there to play that guard position and it's week 1 and week 2, what are we going to be talking about? Man, let me tell you, the Eagles gave up so many sacks. What a poor decision by the Eagles to put fill-in-the-blank guy out there. Can you believe that we thought that fill-in-the-blank could play guard? How ridiculous of a decision is that? When we were the same people 3 months earlier agreeing with that decision because we weren't informed enough. But now we are informed enough, and now we have more information in front of us, and we know that Matt Pryor, as Trey Thomas put, can play the position. And as Trey Thomas explained, it's probably not a good idea to kick Jason Peters inside just for the sake of having him on the roster. So why not save that money under the cap for an opportunity that you know is going to happen? Because what is the history of this team? Somebody gets injured, and you got to fill the roster spot with somebody. Maybe it's a better idea for Howie and Doug to save that roster money for when another injury comes up than spend big money on bringing back bringing back Peters or bringing in a veteran like Warford. Just saying. We have to think long-term, not just short-term, when it comes to this Eagles team. Oh, and by the way, Brandon Brooks is under contract for the next few years. So when he is healthy and when he is recovered, we do expect him to come back better than ever. Heck, he put out a video on Instagram yesterday. He's got his foot in a boot, the foot that he tore the Achilles on, and he's out there doing jiu-jitsu. The guy is still out there working out and training, despite the fact that he ripped off his Achilles. So you don't think Brandon Brooks has the eyes on the long-term goal? I almost am willing to guarantee you that Brandon Brooks comes back and has another Pro Bowl year next year, because that's the kind of motivated hard worker he is. All right, let's get to the text board, 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation, 609-403-0973. Tom from the Villas chimes in and says, I think they should save the money because before the season starts, they're going to realize they need to spend it on a linebacker or two. That's from Tom in the Villas. You know, Tom, the linebacker question is very interesting because the guys have talked about it on Football at 4 on the Sports Bash, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Yeah, and whether it's Andrew DeCecco or Jeff Mosher or Adam Kaplan, a lot of these guys keep bringing up the fact of the Eagles don't play three linebackers on the field usually. They're usually playing the three corners, the slot corner, the two outside, two linebackers. So a lot of times they're in nickel more often than the traditional 4-3 alignment. So are we maybe looking at the linebacker incorrectly and assuming there has to be three? Or is it just important enough to have two good ones and then two guys backing them up? According to reports, the Eagles really like Duke Riley. That's something that's been brought up on Football at 4. The Eagles like Nate Gary. Fans might not like him, but the Eagles seem to like him. There's TJ Edwards there. You brought in a guy like Chatavis Brown, a guy who played in the Chargers. I almost said San Diego. No, the Los Angeles Chargers the last couple of years. He's a guy who's a speed, in-space kind of guy. You drafted guys like Devion Taylor for a reason. Maybe the Eagles' plan to make up for not having to go out there and spend a lot of money on linebacker is to play less linebackers and to play more secondary guys. You signed Will Parks. You drafted Kavon Wallace. You brought back Jalen Mills. You're talking about using these guys in utility fashion. We know that Avonte Maddox even has a little bit of history playing safety. Maybe the Eagles' long-term goal, along with bringing in a guy like Marquand Manuel to be the new defensive backs coach, is to use more defensive backs and less linebackers. It's just a thought. I'm not saying that that's the solution, but I think we have a perception of linebacker because we're so used to the history of the league being you play this number of linebackers. You have to have three linebackers, and for years with Andy Reid, it was, guys like Dahani Jones and Takeo Spikes, and we were wondering, is this going to be the guy? Is this going to be the right outside, weak side, strong side linebacker? We always had those questions for years. Moises Foku, remember him? There's all these guys who've come through the Eagles who we always had these questions about. Well, maybe the solution is to just play less linebackers and play more of other players, and that can make up for not having an elite linebacker. The Eagles did win a Super Bowl without Jordan Hicks. So maybe you don't need an elite central linebacker to win a championship in the NFL in today's game. All right, we'll get back to text board a little bit later in the show, 609-403-0973. But coming up next, it is a Weinberg Wednesday. Dave Weinberg covered the Eagles for over 26 years. We'll get into his mind about his thoughts on the loss of Brandon Brooks, Doug Pederson's Zoom press conference, and more right here on the warm-up, 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Welcome back into the warm-up here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get back to your text in just a bit, 609-403-0973. Right now, joining us each and every Wednesday, it's a Weinberg Wednesday. Dave Weinberg, longtime Eagles beat writer, also covered boxing in Atlantic City, MMA, South Jersey High School sports, and more. So he's got his fingers on a little bit of everything, and he joins us as he does each and every week here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Obviously, the Eagles just don't seem to be able to stay out of the news, so we have to start there.
Sure.
The news with Brandon Brooks, obviously a huge blow. Tore the other Achilles tendon. He tore one about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now. Now he's torn the other one, although now he's already in video on his Instagram doing jiu-jitsu with a boot on. So, I guess for Brandon, there's a new reason to put the modicum of, no days off. But, just talk about, the importance of Brandon Brooks and what his loss means for the Eagles in 2020.
You're right, Josh. It is a huge blow to them. I assume people know, but just in case they don't, He's arguably the best interior offensive lineman in the NFL. And to lose him really upsets the chemistry for an offensive lineman. Was kind of going through some changes as it was with Jason Peters being a free agent, and for them to lose just another perennial Pro Bowler like Brandon, that's really going to force them to make even more changes to get some stability up front.
One of the things that was brought up by Trey Thomas yesterday on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN was he feels like Matt Pryor can fill in and it wouldn't be too big of a drop-off because Pryor showed that, for example, an ability to go to a place like New York and handle the silent count and not get blitzed, off the line, and he handled the job well. It shows that that is a guy who can fill in. Do you agree with the sentiment that Pryor, because he has experience, cannot be a huge drop-off from Brandon Brooks?
I kind of think it's a pretty big one. I mean, Matt Pryor did play well in the playoff game last year, but he's not. That's one, maybe 2 games, and that's not enough of a body of work for me to be convinced that he's going to be able to plug him in without losing a beat. I mean, he certainly has the potential to be a reliable starter for them. But you're talking about a guy who's had one NFL start against a guy who's made the Pro Bowl 3 straight years. So, I think it's a pretty huge loss for them. Trey obviously knows way more than I do about playing the offensive line. So maybe he sees some things in Matt that, the normal person, the lay person doesn't see. But to me, Brandon's like as good as it gets. And I don't know that Matt is at that level yet.
We know that last year in the playoff game, you were without both Brooks and Lane Johnson. So, David, your perspective, which is a guy that would concern you more if the Eagles didn't have for the entirety of 2020? Would it be Brooks or would it be Lane?
Boy, that's tough to say. Probably Lane would be the bigger loss just because of the position that he plays. Both the tackle positions are the guys who, they're kind of the anchors of the offensive line. They're the guys who get paid the most money and deservedly so, because they're the ones who have to, face the speed rushers and edge rushers and that kind of stuff. So I would think being without Lane for an extended period of time would be really hurtful for them. Hopefully he'll be able to stay healthy and, they'll have him for all 16 games and beyond. But again, like I said, Brandon's no slouch either. I mean, you're going to have a drop-off if you're going to lose either one of those guys. So, but I would think Lane would probably be the bigger loss just because he's a right tackle.
Now, staying on the offensive line, Doug Pederson did mention, wanting to look internally first with ways to take care of the offensive line. But knowing the Eagles the way you do you expect them to just stick with Pryor and the guys they have in-house along with the 2 rookies they drafted out of Auburn? Or do you think they should go out there and find some other veteran that maybe just bring in the camp at least to see, just in case maybe one of the other guys doesn't work out?
I would probably go status quo. They're kind of used to that. I mean, they have a pretty good history of drafting and signing young players to groom. If they have to be used, and really haven't had any big issues with the guys that they've had to plug in there. So I would give Pryor the first crack at it. Nate Herbig. Possibly, and like you said, the 2 rookies might have a shot. I know there's been some talk of bringing Jason Peters back and asking him to play guard. He's never done it in his life, and I'm not so sure he'd be willing to do it. I also saw one report where there might be a possibility of talking Kyle Long, Chris's brother, who just retired, maybe talking him out of retirement and maybe asking him to come back. I think that might be a possibility like down the road if these other guys clearly don't work out during training camp. But as of now, I would look for them to just stick with the guys they have.
It's Weinberg Wednesday here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following Dave on Twitter at Dave Weinberg 19. Dave, one of the surprising things for me from Doug Pederson's Zoom media call this week was he acted like Alshon Jeffrey could actually have a role in the offense this year, which is surprising to me because I think a lot of people assumed that because Alshon was going to be out at least for the first half of the year recovering from his injury, that he wouldn't have a role. But it seems like in Doug's mind, he's at least open to finding ways to get Alshon involved in the offense this year.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too, Josh. I thought that he was pretty much he was a kind of a disruptive influence in the locker room last year. There was he was tied to a lot of the rumors about, dissatisfaction with Carson that leaked out. And I guess they probably just figured since they couldn't trade him, they can't afford to cut him. So since they couldn't find any takers, maybe Doug's just kind of doing some backtracking a little bit, trying to build up his confidence, trying to make sure that he's, in tune with what they're going to do. Because you're right. I mean, when he's healthy, he's really good and, better than anything they have, really. So it's just a matter of getting him mentally and focused and into the game and into the team. And if they can do that, I guess this is Doug's way of kind of setting the stage for that as the season progresses.
Is there maybe a possibility, and I'm just trying to think outside the box right now, so, if I'm wrong, just slap me down. You're more than welcome.
Oh, that's okay.
But, they hired Aaron Moorhead to be the new wide receiver coach. Does maybe Doug have confidence in Moorhead to maybe get that room in order a little bit better than previous wide receiver coaches, and maybe that's a reason why there are people in the organization who are not worried about Alshon's influence?
Yeah, that's outside the box. You're right. I don't know that there's a position coach. I mean, a real wide receiver coach there that can really control that room. Because you're talking about Alshon, you're talking about Deshaun, who has a very strong voice in the locker room as a veteran, and they're the guys that are probably going to control the environment in there more so than the coaches. So I guess they're just hoping that maybe Deshaun can be the guy that he didn't do a very good job of it last year, maybe because he was hurt, I guess. But if Deshaun can stay healthy, maybe he'll feel more comfortable having more of a leadership role in the wide receiver room, and have some influence over JJ Arcega-Whiteside, Jalen Reagor, and even Alshon. Even though Alshon's a veteran, I think he's kind of hope that the veterans are going to be able to guide the young guys and maintain their own focus at the same time.
I know that you brought up Deshaun. I know that he was a guy that guys like, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans pointed to a lot in their own development in Tampa. They really said that he was a big-time leader and guy who helped them become better wide receivers. So maybe, as you said, maybe Deshaun is the guy that the Eagles are looking at because he doesn't, just not because they know him, but because they know he has a history of doing it in other places like Tampa.
Yeah, I mean, Deshaun, is a kind of a strange guy, and he has that reputation of being kind of like the fly in the ointment and kind of a wild card, which dates back mainly to his younger days as an Eagle. But over the years, he's settled down. He's more mature, very hard worker, a very good player when healthy. Like, injuries have set him back, obviously, the last few years. But he's a very strong leader, and he's someone that younger wide receivers can definitely look up to and look to for guidance and leadership.
Dave, I saw an interesting stat about Doug Pederson. You and I have talked about Doug Pederson multiple times over the last few weeks, but on this ESPN Plus article, they evaluated all 32 play callers in the NFL, and they broke them down in different categories. Well, Doug Pederson's play calling has the Eagles among the most offensive snaps per game. Is that something that is specifically about Doug's style of play calling, you believe? Or do you think that is a byproduct of just maybe the defense playing well? Like, what do you think could be a reason why the Eagles are so high in the number of offensive snaps per game?
I'm going to put a lot of credit on the defense for getting off the field and giving the offense more opportunities. I think the pace of the game probably has something to do with that too. He's very good at mixing things up. When they have the lead, he's not afraid to run the ball, but he's also more short to medium range passes, which kind of they haven't been like that big quick strike team. Throwing the ball 60 yards for a touchdown. They tend to move the ball down the field on offense, and that obviously takes up more plays. So I don't know that there's an advantage or a disadvantage to it. I mean, as long as you get the ball in the end zone, I don't think it matters whether it's 10 plays or 2. But I'm not surprised because, like I said, the defense is, they've had their troubles at times, but they're also very good at getting off the field and giving the ball back to Doug to work his magic on offense.
So then, if it is the defense a part of that, do we not give enough credit to Jim Schwartz? Because, there's a lot of Eagle fans out there. They're always calling for Jim Schwartz's head. He doesn't blitz enough, or, I don't know why he does this or that. They always come up with some excuse after some of these losses. But do we not give Jim Schwartz enough credit in his 4 years here in Philadelphia?
That's probably a fair assessment. I don't know that he's, the next Buddy Ryan or anything, or a defensive guru, if you will. But the fact I've been very impressed with the job he's done in the last 2 years because of the injuries that have decimated that defense, particularly in the secondary. I mean, for him to have to go with Crevon LeBlanc and guys like that who were kind of on the street and have to plug them in and expect them to play major roles. I think that's a huge credit to Jim's ability to adapt and to adjust to what would have devastated a lot of other teams, I think. The defense has struggled at times, and the fans are right to boo them when they do. But by the same token, I don't think they would have been in the playoffs the last couple of years without Jim Schwartz.
I mean, whether it's fair or not, Jim Schwartz does have more playoff wins in Philadelphia than Buddy Ryan did in Philadelphia. So whatever that's worth, right?
Well, anything's better than zero.
But in seriousness, I always remember all the times, whether it's the Sports Bash with Mike Gill or me here on 97.3, all these different shows, I feel like people have this perspective of Jim Schwartz that he's so poor, he's so bad. And as you mentioned, this guy has been basically playing with guys off the street sometimes. I mentioned earlier in the show, it feels like every year, no matter what, without fail, the Eagles have some sort of serious injury. I mean, people forget there was no Jordan Hicks in the Super Bowl run, for that whole second half of the season. So it feels like no matter what, this guy is dealing with some sort of injury. And I'm not saying that he's Bill Belichick, but maybe, just maybe, it's time for us to give the guy maybe just a little bit more credit.
Yeah, I mean, Jim doesn't help himself. He's kind of an arrogant kind of guy, and he's a strong believer in his abilities, and he's kind of backed it up for the most part. I mean, people will, always turn to the Super Bowl, and giving up 500 yards or whatever to Tom Brady, but they still won the game, and they made the stop when they had to make it at the end, and that's kind of been his MO since he's gotten here. They do give up some big plays, they do fall behind, but usually when push comes to shove, they find a way to get that turnover, that sack, that interception that kind of like seals the deal. I mean, people probably don't remember well, I'm sure they do, the NFC Championship game back in 2017 where things really weren't going their way against Minnesota, but then Nolan Carroll has that pick six and it turns the whole season around, basically it turns the whole game around, and I don't know if they go to the Super Bowl without that play. So it's they always seem to have that habit, and that's a credit to Jim Schwartz. He always finds a way to put the guys in the right position to make plays. He does a great job of taking advantage of an individual player's talent. He doesn't ask them to do too much, and seems to do a good job of recognizing what they're best at and utilizing that.
Dave Weinberg joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline for a Weinberg Wednesday here on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at Dave Weinberg19. And Dave, you tweeted this earlier today about what happened 26 years ago today, which was one of the craziest days in sports. Part of that big day was the white Ford Bronco. OJ was a part of a huge slate, which also included the Game 5 of the 94 NBA Finals, Arnold Palmer playing his final U.S. Open, and a host of other things that happened that day. So, you asked the question, where were you when it happened? Well, you said you were in your living room. So paint a little picture for us there.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it just being so surreal. Like everybody back then, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but everybody back then was glued to the OJ trial. The fact that he had been accused of murdering his estranged wife and Ronald Goldman as well. An iconic American hero being accused of such a gruesome crime. And just the whole bizarre nature of how that day unfolded. I mean, OJ was supposed to turn himself in to the police like 11 o'clock, and then it became like 1 o'clock, then it became 3 o'clock, and then all of a sudden you see coverage of this white Ford Bronco rolling down the highway in L.A., and there's like they weren't chasing him, though. They were kind of like escorting him. It was really bizarre. They could have easily forced him to pull over. They just kind of like hung back, and fans are lining the overpasses and the freeways. cheering and rooting for him. The whole thing was just a huge circus, but you couldn't take your eyes off it. It was just riveting television just because it was so bizarre.
The two things that stand out to me the most was, number one, I was so angry that they cut into Game 5 of the NBA Finals, because that's what I was watching that day, Dave. I was so angry. And this is younger Josh, more irrational Josh. I'm screaming at the TV, and my parents were asking what the heck's wrong. And then my parents basically pushed me aside because they want to see the OJ chase. And, that's part of what I remember. But the other thing I remember is, can you imagine what that would have been like in today's social media age, how even more out of control that could have been?
Oh my gosh. I mean, the age of social media, the way it is now, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, it would have been 100 times bigger, I guess, which is hard to believe. But yeah, you would have been people with their cell phones, leaning over the overpass, trying to get photos and taking video. It would have been huge, and it's hard to believe that it would have been bigger than it was, because it was such a big deal. I mean, every network cut away from, I know there were housewives were upset because they cut away from soap operas to show this. Plus, sports junkies like us, who didn't get to see the cut away from the playoff game. And yeah, it was just an amazing event. And you're right, it would probably even be bigger if it happened today. Although I don't know that the police would have just hung back and let them and escorted them around the city like they did back then.
Well, there would have been so many cameras also back then. Can we imagine, how many different angles we would have had on the whole situation? The next door neighbor has a cell phone camera. When he eventually gets to the police station, someone's following him into the building. Like, I just, in my mind, I'm running through all these scenarios of how it would have been different. Because, I would argue that the OJ trial was probably one of the biggest news events of my lifetime. And
oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
It's just amazing that it was that huge, and it was that much wall-to-wall coverage, and that was before the event of the internet as we know it today. And I can just only imagine how, that might have been 10 times bigger and more insane than it ever was if it was with everything we have available to us today.
Yep. Yeah. And the funny part is that Ford is bringing the Bronco back, and they're debuting it on July 9th, which is OJ's birthday. So that's going to add an even bigger circus in a couple weeks.
Oh, my goodness. Another sign that it's 2020. Somebody capitalizing on something that happened 26 years ago. Figures, right?
There you go. Yep.
Dave Weinberg. Follow him on Twitter at Dave Weinberg 19. He joins us here every Wednesday for a Weinberg Wednesday here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. And as all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Dave, appreciate the time, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Take care.
Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get back to text board next, 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation right here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Welcome back into the warm-up. Josh Hennig, one more final segment here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, text board is open for you, 609-403-0973. Before we get to the text board, though, this news just shot out of nowhere. Rob Manfred flew to Phoenix last night to have a one-on-one meeting with MLBPA Union Chief Tony Clark, and they met again today. And according to John Heyman, it was a productive meeting. What are the odds? Two people sitting in a room have to look at each other in the face and have an honest, real conversation. It's funny how that works. You don't have the wall of, a Zoom meeting. You don't have the shield of typing on a keyboard. You don't have the ability to use press releases to, put in a gap between you and somebody else. No, you actually have to have a conversation with the person sitting right in front of you. Listen, I'm not promising you that baseball is going to come back now all of a sudden and everything's hunky-dory. But what I am telling you is that we are closer to having a baseball season than we were yesterday, just because two of the primary agents in making that happen had to sit each other, look at each other in the face, and have an honest conversation, and probably admit that they're both a little bit wrong in all this. Just saying. I'm sure Mike Gill and Hunter Brody will have a lot to talk about this coming up on the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. You know, they got a busy day today. Jason Fitz, ESPN radio host, Football at 4 with Jeff Mosher. Also, Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports NBA. I'm sure they're going to talk about some of this baseball stuff, too. Keep it tuned. 97.3 ESPN. I did promise. Back to text board. 609-403-0973. Dan from EHT, a loyal texter, chimes in and says, "Wake up, Josh. Brooks most likely got injured from the jiu-jitsu training, if not directly from it, but overtraining." Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Dan. I'll get to your other text in just a moment. But Brandon Brooks himself actually came out on Twitter yesterday and said exactly what he got injured with. This was yesterday. He said, "I noticed a lot of people wondering how it happened. So let me be clear." This is Brandon Brooks talking. "I was doing 60-yard shuttles, and on the 7th of the 8th, I went to touch the line to push off and pop." Pop is in caps, by the way. Brooks goes on to say, "That being said, the work doesn't stop because of an injury. The direction I'll continue to move in is forward. All love." That's Brandon Brooks on Twitter. So he actually injured it doing shuttle runs. And remember, he was recovering from an upper body injury, not a lower body injury. So the idea of him running around was probably not the craziest idea in the world. You know, I've heard it helps with conditioning. Just, heard rumors about that. Running helps with conditioning. So, no, he didn't get injured doing jiu-jitsu. And I would argue that if you did get injured doing jiu-jitsu, either the person you're rolling with is inexperienced and doesn't know how to handle people, and that person should be thrown out of your jiu-jitsu gym, or you are being irresponsible and you put yourself in a position to get hurt. That's why an injury occurred. Because let me tell you something. Jiu-jitsu is not a thing that you can roll around and typically get injured doing. The way you roll is actually made so you don't get injured because you're preparing to prevent someone else from injuring you. By the way, Dan from EHC also texting earlier said it does seem like the Eagles draft picks in the Peterson era have been very good offensively. The defense is another story. It's obviously a topic we can get into tomorrow because I have Mike Clay, ESPN NFL Insider, joining us tomorrow. The ESPN Plus article where he evaluated all 32 play callers. What does he think of Doug Pederson? We'll get into that tomorrow with Mike Clay.